I want to talk about something kind of random and abstract that I tend to just get in these weird kind of like brooding anxiety spirals about. I'm sure I'm not the only person who like thinks about this, but I'm not really sure what to call it. I guess I'll call it like the horror of perspective. So the other day I was reading a forum and people were talking about this like weird comment that they had read on another forum and it was like a forum for just venting. I don't know if you're familiar with this because I guess not everyone goes to these kind of online spaces, and that's probably a good thing. But there's so many different online spaces like forums, subreddits, like Facebook groups where you can basically go and like vent about your problems or your life. And I guess the thing that interests me about this is that like you are like the one who's providing all of the information and like describing everything. So other people's knowledge of the situation is totally limited to like what you say and how you describe it. Anyways, this particular post was basically this person venting about how they felt like they'd been treated really badly and unfairly by other people because they felt like a person had gotten really mad at them out of nowhere. And actually reading the post, it kind of seemed like it was really hard to tell what was actually going on. It was written in such a vague way that it wasn't really clear why people got mad at them. But sorry, I feel like it's kind of impossible to like articulate how weird this post actually was because it sounds very vague. But I would guess it's probably kind of the equivalent of like if somebody was doing something that's like just extremely rude and not done, like if you were like at work or school and somebody else just kept like stealing your food or like taking money out of your wallet or something, and then like if you confronted them about it, the person was like, oh, why didn't you tell me that you didn't want me to do it? That's sort of how this post was reading. It sounded like this person had done something that really, really upset someone else, but their reaction was, wow, why did this person get upset at me out of nowhere? They never told me not to do it. And the thing about the post that like I think other people found so weird and that I found so like liable to send me into like an anxiety spiral was that the person was just writing these like walls of text explaining why they thought that their behavior was actually logical and like why they thought that everybody else was actually irrational for being mad at them. And like I don't know, I think it really set me off because well, just to sort of backtrack into my personal feelings, um, as an autistic person, I think that like one of the things that like most rubs me the wrong way about media portrayals of autism is that it's usually based on the idea that the autistic person doesn't understand what's going on and doesn't understand situations. And I feel like this constant message that like this is true, and especially the way it's kind of used in narratives, because obviously like if you're reading a narrative, like there's a writer who has like an objective idea of the way things are. So for the writer to like specifically decide that like this character like doesn't understand the way things are, um, it's something that's kind of more objective than it is in real life. And it's weird to say, but I actually think growing up, this was one of the most negative things about being autistic, that I felt like I was always receiving the message from like any media that was about autistic people or any writing that I read about autistic people, which was always by non-autistic professionals, that always portrayed autistic people's like feelings and points of view and interpretation of situations as being objectively wrong. And like I think up until I was in like till I was about 20, I guess, I think I always sort of like lived life with like a weird sense that like my feelings or experiences or like my interpretation of things were objectively wrong. Like I think one thing that I can't believe I did, and in retrospect it was quite awful, is like I think I was really incapable of like telling when somebody was like telling lies about another person or like being really nasty about another person. Like if someone else told me something, I would just think like, oh, that must be true. Like I don't think I really had much of a sense for like, oh, but like what do I think, you know? And I think I even had a tendency to act like if I saw other people acting shitty, I would try to act shitty in the same way, because I kind of had this sense of like, okay, I see other people doing it, so that's the correct way to be. I won't try to like do what I think is right, or like think about the right thing to do, because like, I'm just a stupid autistic person. Anyways, so I think the reason why this post bothered me so much was because I think as I've grown up, I've kind of come to think that like the only way to really deal with situations is to not try to copy someone else or try to do what someone else would do, or, but just to really think about what's going on as rationally as you can. And so I think it's kind of freaky to think about the fact that like somebody can actually be really insensitive or act really badly, but also still be able to give like an explanation. Well, maybe not a rational sounding explanation, but like can at least give an explanation that they think is rational for why they're behaving the way they are. There's just something about that like really freaks me out, because it makes me feel like I have no way of knowing if I'm like approaching situations in the right way. And then I guess the other thing I was thinking about was how kind of posting in social media, or I don't know if like forums and stuff could be called social media. I think of social media more as stuff that's like connected to your real identity. But I mean, Facebook groups I think are a form of this. But I guess sort of, I think a lot about the way that like posting on forums and Facebook groups and stuff like that, like the way that it can feel like a good way to talk about your problems or get advice, because you're talking to people who are like unbiased because they don't know you. But then at the same time, the fact that, it all depends on, first of all, you like describing things as they really are, but also people like understanding how things really are. Like I think either people can sometimes describe their own circumstances in a way that's misleading, intentionally or not. Or I also think a lot of the time people just don't take other people at their word. And I guess this is another thing that I struggle with a lot. I think, sorry, I've been on the verge of coughing for like a really long time, but I just can't keep doing this without coughing. So I think one thing that I often experienced when I was growing up was just like people not taking me at my word. I think it's kind of sort of a normal thing that can happen to you if you have a disability, because it's like people sort of have like a basic idea of like what people can do, what's an easy thing for people to do, what's a hard thing for people to do, what are people's experiences like. And like one of my early kind of blog posts, YouTube videos when I started writing about autistic stuff was talking about how when I was growing up, a lot of the time I would be like in physical pain or physically uncomfortable from sensory issues, and like adults around me would always tell me that I wasn't actually in pain, and sort of how that affected me. And I think as well as being like the pain thing, there's also just the whole, I really don't like the label twice exceptional, and this is probably the only time you'll ever hear me use it, but basically kids who present as gifted or at least like smart but also have mental disabilities, I feel like a lot of the time are accused of like faking not being able to do certain things, because I think people think that if they perceive you as smart, you should be able to do like a whole range of things that aren't necessarily part of being smart. So I don't know, I guess I just feel like in many ways I was very used to people not believing me about my reports of things, even things that just had to do with like me and like what I could do and what I felt, when really like I may not always know everything about myself, but I am like the most knowledgeable person about myself. Everybody is. So thinking about that, I think that's sort of like a big thing that like influenced me into always wanting to take people at their word. Like, I think there are so many assumptions that people have about what people are like and like how people behave in different situations, and like they're always based on so many things that like aren't actually true, like that no one has a disability. Like, I feel like a lot of the time people make assumptions about interpersonal situations that are like very heterosexist. Like, you know, it's kind of hard for people to not assume that, like, I don't know, people of the opposite sex are like always trying to have sex with each other, and that explains like a lot more interpersonal situations than it actually explains. I know for me, sometimes I don't know, I think sometimes I just do things honestly just because I'm dumb, or just like I wasn't thinking. And it's really weird, like, when like you do something like that and people think that you did it for a specific reason and that you had a motivation, and people like won't believe that you didn't have a motivation. Sorry, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so I was thinking about taking people at their word. I think that after kind of in my early 20s thinking a lot about autism stuff, I began to be like very firmly determined to always try to take people at their word and not question people's presentation of themselves or of situations. But I did kind of realize that sometimes that's not really, I mean, sometimes people just aren't presenting themselves honestly, or they just don't really, they're not really honest with themselves. You know, like the way that people can obviously like be reacting out of anger, but they will say that they're not angry, or people will like be upset or nervous about something and they might feel better if they just admitted it, but they'll like insist that they're fine, or that people will like fake confidence and stuff like that. That like people aren't really making an effort to like understand themselves and present themselves directly, you know? But I feel like even though a lot of the time people aren't being honest, like, or they don't know how things really are, I have to at least try to like treat people as if they're being honest, because I think the opposite, the idea of trying to like guess what's really going on, is just so often wrong because people are so different and you just can't, a lot of the time, you just don't know everything that's going on with a person, and like you're just relying on stereotypes and you're just going to be wrong. So I think it actually takes me like often a couple of years of knowing somebody to like actually feel like I have a real judgment. Like, you know, like this person says that they're being really honest, but actually they just like want to say something mean. Or like, you know, this person tries to not be upset and say that they're not upset and present as if they're not upset when they're really upset. But like, that's through like knowing somebody, being fairly close to them, and like being able to observe them. And like, I think there's really no point of like trying to like draw conclusions about people when you don't know them that well. Oh, right. So where was I? Oh, yeah. So I was thinking about posting online, venting about things online, why that's a dumb thing to do. Like, I think I don't want to say I'm like the most unique person ever. I'm not super unique. I just think that like, if I'm not in a space with like specifically autistic people, some of my experiences and feelings might be different from the norm. And I do a kind of work that a lot of people don't know about or necessarily know kind of like how that kind of job works and a lot of things about it. I think the majority of people can't really relate to having a job that is so kind of intertwined between like family and like being very casual, but is also a job. Like, I think most people have an idea of a job that is like somewhat more cut and dry than mine is. So it makes it hard to talk about that. And then like in terms of relationships, like I don't know, for example, like I guess I'm recently exploring being polyamorous, and that's a bit like the average person, I think, finds it hard not to kind of fill in things like if someone talks about a relationship, assuming that everybody involved is monogamous and that that's like a concern. Like, at the very least, if you were trying to describe a relationship that was polyamorous, you would have to like make a specific point of like trying to communicate that you're like not concerned about monogamy, to avoid people assuming that you are, and that like must be a factor in whatever you're talking about. Not that I'm venting about my relationship a lot. I don't want to alarm the other person if they're watching this video. But yeah, so there's all of those things. And then, I don't know, maybe this happens to everyone. I just feel like a lot of the time, if I go to some random online space and I try to like vent about something because like I don't know, I guess I want some kind of feedback, so I don't want to journal about it, but I also don't want to like bother a friend with something that maybe seems dumb, so I'll just like write it out in some random place. And I feel like half the time I end up getting responses or advice that are like extremely different from what's actually going on, and addressing some random thing that like isn't what I was really concerned about. Or and this is what it comes back to, and this is what kind of freaks me out. Sometimes I'll get responses that are like, oh my gosh, like, you're clearly doing something that like really bothers or offends like your friend or your partner or like whichever person you're talking about, and like you're upsetting them so much, and like they like aren't telling you, or they're like trying to tell you when you're not listening or something like that. And like getting those kind of responses is really freaky, because a lot of the time it feels like, oh, well, like you actually don't know me. Let me like explain some more about the situation. I'll explain like why I don't think that's the case. But there's always this part of me that's like, wait, how do I really know? Like, how do I know that this random person on the internet who's only going for my description of events, which may be somewhat down on myself, I'm not sure, but how do I know that this person like isn't right, that like, someone in my life actually has like an extremely negative reaction to me? And it's just like, I don't know, there's something about it that kind of eats my brain, because it's like, wow, I have no way of like knowing for sure that the person is wrong, even though like their understanding of the situation is limited. They don't really know anything. I don't know, it just kind of gets me a little bit freaked out. And then like, on one forum that I post, I know two people. There's one person who I've gotten to know through reading their posts, and then like one person who I actually know in real life. And I can specifically see the ways that like both of these people get misunderstood when like they do vents. And like the person that I don't know, I just can kind of like see that I don't know, they just have a certain way of like talking and thinking about things, and like they're very much like me. They're also autistic. They have like a similar background to me, and I just feel like I can usually see what their intentions are, but a lot of the time, like, other people will get really offended and like misunderstand things that they say. And then, like, the person that I know in real life is like an extremely nice and kind person, but she has like a very colorful way of talking. And I feel like in spaces where people don't know her, like, I don't know, when she uses kind of like out there analogies, or just uses kind of like flippant terms for things or something, like, people often will get like really offended by her, and she'll get in like a big fight with a bunch of randos. Sorry, I feel like this probably is like not um, a very understandable video for people who aren't like extremely online, but I don't know, there's just something about these interactions. And I guess if I can see these things happening to other people and like realize that, you know, the other random strangers on the internet that don't know them are misunderstanding them, like maybe I could also feel that way. But there's also like still this part of me that is kind of like, oh my gosh, what if everyone in my life actually hates me, and like only the internet strangers were like honest enough to tell me that? Like, I feel like if I post in like, I don't know, say like a Facebook group full of like real life friends, and I like vented about something, I feel like I generally get responses that both are more supportive, but also like feel like they're more on the same page as me, and not like they're misinterpreting what I was talking about. But then like another part of me is like, oh my gosh, those people are being polite to me like because they know me. Even though it's probably more because like we have more in common, and that's why they understood what I was talking about. Another thing is like, I've never posted on the subreddit like our relationships, but I guess it's kind of famous for this happening in a really extreme way, where basically somebody posts about their relationship, and as with all these other situations, like, what the readers know is completely based on how this person articulates it and the information that the poster gives. But that like it's very common for like the whole commentariat to be like, your partner is crazy, they're evil, and like, sort of drawing all these really bad and negative conclusions about the partner. I actually when I was much younger, was in a not very good relationship, and it we broke up over my girlfriend insisting that one of my friends was in love with me and trying to steal me away from her. And she like wouldn't believe me, like no matter how much I was like, no, that's not true. Like, it's like kind of hard to like prove that somebody isn't in love with you like once someone else already thinks it. But basically, like, no matter how much evidence I gave or how much I tried to explain that like this wasn't the case, she just like didn't believe me. And anyway, after we broke up, she revealed that the reason she thought this was true was because she posted about our relationship on Our Relationships. And yeah, this was one of the things that the commentary came up with. And they like told her like all the reasons why they thought this was true based on her description of our relationship. And she was very controlling and also tended to be very jealous when I was friends with guys or spent any time with guys. I'm not super clear on what's up with that, but so basically, based on the way that she described the situation, they, I think, possibly reflected back on her what she was thinking and were like, yes, like this, and this is going on. And I think also the fact that, like I said, people's assumptions can be kind of heterosexist. I think that maybe was like another push to like thinking about things that way. Anyway, that's my only experience with like our relationships. And I also think, as far as I know, most of my close friends and partners or whatever aren't extremely online in the specific way that I am, where I'm always venting about things to random people. But I'm sure someday I'll be really close with someone who is, and maybe someday I'll find like a really long vent that's like an extremely that is just like about me and like my interpersonal problems with somebody, which is kind of weird. Sorry, actually, I don't want to give the impression to any friends who are listening to this. Usually, when I vent, it's not about my specific problems with a specific person. Okay, but I still end up saying a lot of things that end up getting misinterpreted. And also, like with the Our Relationships thing, I do find that whenever I vent somewhere about someone, the response that I get is either you're a bad person or like the other person's a bad person. And like the reasons that whichever one of us is a bad person always seem to get like more and more developed by the commenters as they continue like picking apart what I said. Uh, yeah, actually, I was thinking that like the horror of like not knowing what's right and like not knowing what's really going on and like, not knowing if you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing or how you truly come off to other people. I was thinking that's kind of an existential problem, but now that I finished making this video, I've realized that like I just now more than ever need to stop venting about things in online spaces with people who don't know me because like it's such a mind fuck.